Okay, good morning, everyone. No minute to give shiurim over here in the morning. This is, again, as I mentioned yesterday, we're going to complete Be'ezras Hashem this Maimer, which we started 2 weeks ago, Thursday night. We continued it last Thursday night, and I tried to give the shiur Friday morning, and I gave it to complete it, but it was to the full walls. No one picked it up. And I think during that time that I was giving that class and no one picked it up on Friday afternoon, someone tried to sponsor a class in honor of their mother's yard site. So let's dedicate today's class. So I gave yesterday already half of the class that I gave on Friday. And today we're going to do the last part of the class that I kind of gave on Friday, but maybe you'll be able to elaborate a little better on it. And hopefully now it's going to be recorded. So this was dedicated by Mrs. Bela Greenbaum. This is in honor of, I think, her mother, Chaya Sada Bas Moshe Manya, Allah HaShalom. I think it's her mother, Kalmanson, whose yard site was actually on Friday when I gave the original shiur. So even if the actual redo is a little later on Yud Aleph of, but the shiur, actually Friday was Ches, wasn't this? But it was a continuation to Zion, was within 3 days of the yard site. May her neshama have a great aliyah to the greatest, highest heights. May she channel lots of brachas to you, for all that you need, all that you want, for good health, nachas from the entire family, much bracha, and alle gute Sachen. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to pick up right where we left off yesterday, because all the introductions I've done in the previous classes. So we're learning yesterday the idea of Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos. This is in Likutei Torah, Daf Pei Gimel. Pei Gimel, Amid Beis. Now remember that Amid Beis, just get those other glasses, just 1 second. So remember that when we say Beis over here, Daf Pei Beis, Amid Beis, it means the same. Usually in Gemara, Amid Beis means the backside. But in Likutei Torah, there are 4 columns in each page. So Aleph is the first column, Beis is the second one. So this is on Pei Gimel, the second column. We're holding on the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the top. Gam Matos yesh loimer. Okay, so the last idea we learned yesterday was on the concept of Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos, that the idea is that Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the tzaddik, the Moshe, and referring dafka to Moshe, but the reason why the other tzaddikim through the generation have this power is in as much as they are the channel and connected to, and they are the Moshe Rabbeinu's extension throughout all the generations. We said that's the idea of a Rebbe, that they are the Moshe, is Pashtusa the Moshe, and what they do is they enable us to tap transcendental energies. They enable us to open ourselves up to levels of soul that otherwise, which is beyond our kalim. That's the main idea we're learning, that the real energy lies in the makifim, which are the encompassing energies of the soul, which generally we refer to them as chaya chida. That's where the energy is boundless, and that's where the bond with God is beli gvul, is without an end, is limitless. And on our own, through our own avoda, of our own mind and our own thinking and meditation, let's just say it's very, very difficult to reach and to unplug this dimension of soul. And it's through the help of Moshe Rabbeinu in which we access either what he explained earlier is called Roshei Hamatos, the heads of the Mata. Mata is referring to our Avodah Pnimis. According to the first interpretation, we learned that Mata is the 12 tribes, which represent 12 different methods of serving God, and according to the primary characteristics of the spherotic range and infrastructure in which the Jewish people, each tribe represents a different feature. And in that sense, each one of us is serving God in accordance to the capacity of our own soul. This is not a transcendental type of a service because you're working within your kelim, you're working within your vessels and containers. And that's why we have Moshe Rabbeinu who enables us to connect to Roshei Hamatos, which Roshei means Gilgoilas. It means the skull, which represents a level of Keser, which means a level of Hashem that's beyond the vessels, beyond the containers. As we referred to it yesterday, he refers to it as Reusa Deliba, the yearning of the heart that goes beyond the stimulation of the mind, which, as we learned yesterday, is related to the powers of Tohu. The powers where the general difference between Tohu and Tikkun is that Tikkun is Oiros Bekelim, lights and vessels, and Tohu is raw energy, and therefore is uninhibited. Now, the real way and the true, we keep on bringing it back to that, just a few points I do have to review, just that we actually have any idea what we're talking about, is that the real way to act, the real stimulator of these Oiros de Tohu, of these intense lights, is through the uploading of sparks of holiness, which we do through acts of mitzvahs. When we do a mitzvah, we're liberating a spark, and those sparks, which we spoke yesterday, come from the name of Shem Ban, and they go up and they rise into Samach Gimel, into the infinite energies of the Ein Sof, and it stimulates. But the question is stimulating and reaching and registering. We register all the way up high in the infinite. But the question is, will that in any way impact us in our realm? We're living in the world of Tikkun. Our consciousness is a consciousness of Tikkun, primarily our holy consciousness is a consciousness of Tikkun. And our unholy consciousness is a messed up version of Tohu. So it's a collapsed, fallen, it's a broken consciousness. So we're lacking the connection to the energies of Tohu, both from our neshama and from our body, as we are naturally. So when we elevate a spark, we make the connection, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will manifest in our consciousness. For it to manifest in our consciousness, that's the idea of Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Matos. The Moshe Rabbeinu conducts the energy down, channels it down, and to stimulate and to awaken and to allow that tohu, a powerful, limitless, godly connection to happen. That was one pirush we learned. And in that sense, Matos represents the limited and tikkun diga connection to Hashem, and the Roshei Hamatos is what is the transcendental aspect of it. And then we learned yesterday a second pirush, and as I told you, I think it appears to me that it's the Tzemach Tzedek, in which he explains that Matos itself is already indicative of the super-rational element of the soul, because he explains that Matos means firm, rock, solid, unbudgeable, and unchangeable, in which he connects it to the concept called Eitan, the Eitan of the Neshama. And we learned all the ideas from Midrashim and so on and so forth, that's related to the oath which God made with our forefathers, which is we can actually learn about next week in the Parshas Eikev. Shenishbato l'avoseinu, you have sworn to our fathers. And in another pasuk it says, Shenishbato l'avoseinu mimei kedem, and which means that this is a bond that transcends all reason and explanation, and that's why it's firm, because there's no logic and no rationale that can make it wishy-washy, that can make it that makes it up to reconsideration. It's a stubbornness. It's Hashem's stubbornness in which He bonds with us beyond all reason and rationale, and our connection to God as well, which is stubborn. And that's why the Jewish people are called not just Shevatim, we are called Matos, firm, rock solid. And so this is similar to the idea of, this also comes from the Makifim. It's a little nuanced, different than what we spoke before. We spoke about a limitless desire, a fire in the heart that's going unchecked, that's an extreme fire. It's the madness of the soul. And over here we're talking about the stubbornness of the soul. But in general, they're both related to the makifim element of the neshama, in which all these access to this transcendence comes from Moshe Rabbeinu, and again, The stimulator of it comes through our mitzvahs that we do, in which we send up sparks from the world of Tohu, and that's what connects us to it. But in order for it to manifest, as I explained it yesterday, the upload we do, the download, is where we need the connection of the channeling of Moshe Rabbeinu, who is, as we spoke yesterday, Das, Yesod Abba, connected to the Tzinor, to Ratzon, whatever the Kabbalistic explanations that we spoke yesterday, which open us up to such deep consciousness, to such deep connection to Hashem. Now he's going to add a third explanation to the meaning of the word mata. And again, it will also relate to the same idea of a more transcendental connection to God related to the koiches makifim of the neshama. Gamet matos yesh loimar. Also matos we can say hamshacha mibchenas eitz hachayim. It means to be mamshech from the tree of life. Everything in our world is under the dominion, if we can say, or under the system of the Eitz Hadas. There were two trees in the Garden of Eden. One was the more available tree, which was the Eitz Hadas, Tov Ra. That's why Adam and Chava went for that first. There was another tree, we say a little higher, much higher, called the Eitz HaChaim. And that's deeper and higher. And had Adam Rishon first gone to the Eitz HaChaim, he would have never fallen. Eitz HaChaim is a type of connection to God in which you can't fall. It is beyond slipping and falling. The Eitz Hadas is a connection. It's Tov, but it could chas v'shalom lead to the concept of to an inyan of Ra. And in avoda, in service, in our connection to us, what does that mean in our life? If our connection to Hashem comes from our das means our intellectual powers, even the inner intellectual power, which is the power of das, but still as one of our intellectual powers, which means our connection to Hashem is based on our appreciation and our decision and our human energies, if you can say, which begins with our intellectual appreciation. And as a result of that, we choose to do mitzvahs, we choose to bond. That's fantastic, and it's very important that we do that, but we can't rely on that. We always have to open ourselves up to something much deeper than that, because that's not reliable. Because the das today, which can be so firm and so strong, can chas v'shalom, it can't be trusted, because sometimes we experience within our das a das to klipa, and then when we become suddenly aware of unholiness in a very deep way, we can chas v'shalom very quickly relinquish our grasp on holiness and hold on to something unholy. So therefore, a Jew has to connect to Hashem with a power of emunah, with the power of mesiras nefesh. It's beyond our das. In other words, our connection to holiness and to godliness is not a choice where we're choosing. It's beyond choice. It's beyond, when I say beyond choice, it's beyond the choice coming from das. It's more of an essential choice. It's always, and the truth is, on the deepest level, that's the real choice, where you're choosing from your essence, where this is who you are and what you are, and it can't be any different. You so identify with godliness that only holiness and godliness resonate with you. Anything else is essentially rejected. That level of connection, again, is from the godly in us, not from the human in us. It's not from our human limited decision making. It's from the spark of Hashem that is that's called tree of life, where we are one with Hashem with an unbreakable bond. Koyach mesiras nefesh. It's the pintel yid, similar to the concept we're just learning about right before, about the idea of that eitan, the unbreakable bond with God. And that's called mata. Mata is a branch, but it's a higher branch. It's a branch of the Eitz HaChayim, not a branch of the Eitz Hadas. So what that would mean, and again, this is the way I think to understand. I think I'm understanding this. I hope I'm right and not wrong. Chas v'shalom, is that the difference between the tribes, the Jewish people are called Matos, which means tribes, but at other times we're called Shvatim. What's the difference between Shevet and Mata? Shevet is a branch, Mata is a staff. But in accordance to the explanation that we're learning now, Mata is also a branch, but a branch where it is higher up in its connection to the tree. Shevet is Malashon Hamshacha. So Shevet means a drawing forth in where the branch is extending far, far, far away from the tree trunk and definitely from the tree roots. And because it extends and it goes to a more external, more farther away, it is a little weaker, as opposed to the Mata, which is the part of the tree that's very, very firm and very strong because it is attached very, very close to the tree. Why is that called Mata and that's called Shevet? So first of all, in a tree itself, you see that sometimes the explanation is that when does a Shevet become a Mata? When you disconnect a tree branch, a twig, from the tree, and it dries up, it becomes firm, it becomes a staff. That's if we translate Mata as a staff. But Mata sometimes is Mata, firm and strong, not because of its disconnection from the tree. Now we'll soon see that really both of them are related. These two opposite pirushim. In other words, there's one pirush in Mata, that Mata is called a Mata, firm and hard, a staff, a stick. It's because it's not receiving nurture from the tree, it stiffens up, it dries up, and it gets hard. It becomes a hard stick. But there's another reason why Mata is called a Mata, and that is it's hard because it's just connected to the tree and it's very thick. So you see a branch connected to the tree is thick and firm and strong. When the branch extends further, it gets more pliable further up. So what does that mean? And how does it relate to and what is the idea of Mata versus Shevet? You see, Shevet means a Hamshacha. Like we know there is a flying star is called Koichva de Shavit. And what does that mean? It like the star was there, a streak, a star as it streaks across the sky, making this light go across the sky. This streak of light going across the sky is called Shavit because it's an emanation from the source. It's going outward. Now we know the idea that every emanation that goes out gets weaker the farther it goes. Light gets less and less and less, gets weaker as it's extending. So the concept of Shevet, because Shevet means an extension, it refers to on the one hand, it's great because it's extending the light, it's extending the source to a place where the source on its own isn't reaching. It's extending its influence. But because it's going farther and farther away, it itself is weaker than in the source. So what would that mean? That's the concept of the Shvatim. The Shvatim, which are the tribes of Israel, the level of soul of the tribes of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda is not as great as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The Avos have a far deeper, more profound, and deeper connection to God than the children have. As we know, and I explained in Chassidus that the Avos were Yechudei Allah, the higher unity. The Shvatim are Yechudei Tata, the lower unity, the level of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Elam Vad versus Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is a much deeper level of consciousness and connection to God. There is a quality to the children, is because they're impacting the world more. They're descending more into you have to really influence somewhere. You have to become part of what is, and then you can influence from the inside. If you're above it, then no one relates to you. So that's one of the reasons for exile. The Jewish people have to extend. We have to extend our tentacles throughout the entire world so that we can elevate and lift the entire world. But by extending the tentacles, the energy in the tentacle is not as powerful as the energy in the main part of the octopus or whatever it is. It's already an extension of it. So that's the concept of Shvatim. And spiritually, it's explained that the Shvatim are called Shvatim when they bring godliness down into Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, into the three lower worlds. Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. And that's called Shavit. there's a hamshacha, there's a flow, and that's weaker. That's the idea that the twig further up, the tree trunk, you can't move it. As the tree branches go out, it's bendable. They're not as powerful, but they extend out, so that's fantastic. What does mata mean? Mata means to yield, to bend. So it's the same concept of shevet, which means a drawing forth and something flowing outward, but mata is a preliminary state of extension. It's an extension, but the extension only at the very, very beginning. So it's considered not like the source has extended itself, but rather the source is only tilted a little bit. So it would be, the example would be the difference between the branch as it's going out, where it's becoming pliable and soft, and the branch as it is connected to the tree trunk. Over there, because it's still so close to the source, the firmness of the tree, the strength of the tree itself is felt in the branch as well, because it's only the beginning of the branch. The tree itself is tilting outward. And that's the idea of mata. So the Shvatim are a lower level of the forefathers, even on this level, but they are still in Atzilus. They're still above. This is a level of the tribes where they're still very close to their source, and therefore still have within themselves the strength of their source. It's the level of the Nishvatim's Neshamas as they're still in the realm of Atzilus and they haven't descended yet. Now, what does that mean regarding the Shvatim, the tribes of Israel, which is all of us, is that it's not that, we once were there and now we're here. We once were Matos and we're now Shvatim. It means two levels in our own existence. A more inner state of soul, a more inner state of being, a deeper state of our neshama, where our neshama is still living in Atzilus. It's still just a tiny tilting of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov tilting outward. So we're their children, but we're still very much tagging along to them. And then there is the more external part of our neshama, which is our everyday consciousness, and which goes out to descend into daily living, into this world. In a sense, we can understand like kind of the difference between the weekday Jew and the Shabbos Jew. The weekday we're in a shevet state, and on Shabbos we're in a Matos state. So we find this concept that the Shvatim exist on two levels. He's actually going to make a reference of it in a moment. There is what's called Shvatim, and there is what's called Shiftei Ka. We say it in davening on Shabbos. We say it. Shabbos in the morning. We say it's one of the Shir Hamalos, a song that was sung on the steps of the maybe it has to do with the steps because that's the rising up to the Beis Hamikdash. And over there it says Shasham Alu Shvatim, that it's talking about going up the Aliyah L'Regel, when the Jewish people went up to the 3 pilgrimage holidays. They went up to Yerushalayim. So it says Shasham Alu Shvatim. Over there the tribes went up. Shiftei Ka, the tribes of God, the tribes of Yudke. So what's the repetition? We know the Shvatim means all the tribes of Israel went up. The answer is, when we go up higher, we have a different name. There's a deeper identity, a higher level of consciousness opens up. When we went, literally, Jews, when they lived all over the land of Israel, far away from the temple, they experienced only a more external part of their soul. And over there, they can sin, God forbid, because it's pliable, their connection, they're soft. They can be pushed around a little bit by a wind. It's not firm, rock solid. But when we go up to the Beis Hamikdash, we clamber the tree, we go deeper and deeper, and we get closer to the source. We go into a state of Matos, and Mata firm, Shiftei Ka. We go from regular Shvatim to Shiftei Ka. We go up from being a Shevet to being a Mata. And that level is called Eitz HaChaim, tree of life, because Eitz HaDas really starts at the junction between Atzilus and Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. The 3 lower worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, are influenced by Eitz HaDas Tov Ra. That's why in these 3 worlds there is Bechira, there is choice between good and bad. There is a concept of Tov and Ra. Klipas Noga exists in these 3 worlds. primarily in Asiya, in the physical, material world, but even in the spiritual world, there is some concept of evil already, because it's under the influence of Eitz Hadas. Now, Eitz Hadas is Malchus, the Shekhinah is called Eitz Hadas. She herself is infinite, is 1,000%, 100% good. There's no a trace, chas v'shalom, of negativity. But because she allows for, she creates worlds that are separated. And in the world of separation, there is Toiv and Ra. There could be a possible choice, meaning connecting to God is optional. There is some level of optional. And there is a possibility for something that's not holy. And when are we in that state, we the Jewish people, even though we're godly souls, when we pass through Malchus, we pass through Shekhinah, we know all souls become impregnated in Shekhinah, and then we're born down into Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. Then we're called Shvatim, and then it's possible to make a mistake. Our connection is not so firm and so strong. But when we're still in Atzilus, then we're connected to the Eitz HaChaim, tree of life, which generally in many places it's explained, it's the level of Ze'er Anpin. It's called Eitz HaChaim. And over there, there's no Das Tovara. It's Kulo Tov and only good. And on 3 times a year, we would rise into that consciousness as we go into Atzilus. So, in Avoda, what does that mean? Going back to what we said before, as long as we're operating from our human mind, from our experiences of seichel, intellect, means our existence, oires, bekelim, lights and vessels, as we find ourselves in our world, as a creature created by God in this world, as a creature we have some kind of sense of independence, and we choose to connect to God through our appreciation of Him, through our das. That's Eitz Hadas. Eitz HaChaim then means when we connect to our levels of soul that never went down, they're still mateh, they're still attached. It's Eitz HaChaim, which in general it's our koiches makifim, our encompassing powers. So that again shows you from every direction that Tzemach Tzedek is showing you how mateh is whether mateh means firm and strong. That was the previous explanation. Whether mateh means tilting, just the beginning of a mateh, and therefore it's firm and strong and unbendable. And it's connected to, and it's also mateh is also with tree because it's connected to Eitz HaChaim. This connection to Eitz HaChaim, again, Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who lifts us up there. The tzaddik is the one who activates that element of our soul. We find that the Shvatim needed Yosef, who was considered the tzaddik amongst them, to lift them up. That's why when they're sheaves, Yosef is the only sheaves that stands, and theirs bow down to him because they need him to elevate them from Shvatim to Shiftei Ka to a higher level, into Atzilus. Because Yosef, he says, never is a neshama that's in Atzilus as opposed to the other tribes who go down. So similar to Yosef is the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu as well, and higher. Gam Matos yesh loymar. So now he explains Hamshacha mibchenes Eitz HaChaim. It's a Hamshacha. Mateh means to draw, but on a level of Eitz Chaim. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that holds a mateh. He holds a firm stick, because he's the one that activates within the Jewish people the matos. In other words, until Moshe Rabbeinu came around, the Shvatim are Shvatim. They're not matos. Moshe, by him holding a staff, what he does. Now, over there in that Maimer of Atam Hodem Esmatcha, he explains that even the Pnimius HaNeshama, even the Koiches Makifim of the Neshama, even the firm, could even rise even to a higher place. And that's the idea of Hodem Esmatcha, that by Kriyas Yamsuf we had to even Moshe picked up his Mata to an even deeper, higher place in order to cause Kriyas Yamsuf. But that's not the Nekuda that's Nogeya, I think, to this Maimer. What's Nogeya to this Maimer is his explanation that he explains it's an Ora Torah, and Harem Es Matcha, the concept of Mata itself, how sublime Mata is, even before Moshe picks it up to a higher level. Look in Rabbis, in Medrash Rabbah Vayeshev, Parsha Pehei, Gabo Matcha. There it's talking about Yehuda and Tamar, in which Tamar, before Yehuda knows who Tamar is, she's before Yehuda even knows who Tamar is, she's negotiating with him. She's asking him for payment and he says to her, I'll send you 2 goats. And she says, give me something security. So he says, what should I give you? And she says, give me your, one of the things she asked for, she said, give me your staff. So the Medrash says a fascinating thing, that what she was referring to, she says, give me Mashiach. I want a mother Mashiach. Matcha is referring to Matecha as Mashiach. Because it says by Mashiach that he, just like Moshe had a staff, Mashiach is going to have a staff. The Pasuk says, Mate uzcha yishlach Hashem. The staff of power God will send. Redei bekerev avecha, in which Mashiach is going to dominate amongst the enemies. So what exactly you see over here, from that I don't, other than the fact that the Mate is very high, but what he wants to bring out with Mashiach having the Mate, that it says Mate, because other than that I don't see anything else that it says about Mate. But it's just that it's very, very sublime, the Matecha. Mashiach, maybe it's because Mashiach will reconnect us to the Eitz HaChaim, to the tree of life. As we know, when Mashiach comes, there won't be any more death in the world. So maybe that's the idea. I'm not exactly sure with what he wanted dafka with that medrash. Look in what is explained and what I just explained earlier, the difference between Shvatim, Shiftei Ka, 2 levels of tribes, which one is Shvatim, and the higher level, Shiftei Ka, is in general the same idea as Mate. Eidos LeYisrael, Sif Hey, B'Divra Maschal Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. Look in the Maimer, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, which is the first Maimer in Lakutei Torah. And over there, he explains this idea of Shvatim and Shiftei Ka, the deeper connection of Shiftei Ka. V'ayim B'Zayah Chodesh Aleph, Al Pasuk Vayikech LaYaakov Maka Livneh. Look in the Zohar. So I looked up the Zohar. Here it says Kuf Samach Beis Amid Aleph. So it's hard to pinpoint what he wants from that Zohar. I do saw what I think he means. Again, I think is that the Zohar over there is explaining how by Yaakov Avinu, when Yaakov Avinu took, it says when he was at Lavan's house, and he took a staff and he peeled it in various different places. He made stripes of it, and then he used it to place it in front of the sheep so that when they will reproduce speckled and spotted and all the things that he did. So it was some kind of a spiritual, godly manipulation that he was doing over there. So then Yaakov became very wealthy from that. We know that Yaakov was building the entire realms of holiness. But the Zohar says that when he took the makel, the lashon of the Zohar over there is that Yaakov chose his portion, his lot, he went up to a very high place, to a place above all levels, and he took the makel. The makel is from a very high place. And he took it to his chelik. Makel livne lach. It's the level of whiteness, the star yamin of the right side. Veluz va'arman is red. He took other staffs, which is the red, the star smaller. But I think it means a place where yamin and small are connected. Again, I'm not exactly sure. But I think what he wants is just this nakuda, that the makel is a very high level. He probably wants more than that, but that's as much as I was able to take out of it. The only problem is that that's not in Kuf Samach Beis Amid Aleph, that's in Kuf Samach Aleph Amid Beis. And then the conclusion of it is in Daf Kuf Samach Beis Amid Aleph, Vizbaruchu Kula Almin Latata, and from that comes blessings down all the worlds below. The Yaakov Notel Chulke Me'inen Berkon, and Yaakov took his blessings from his portion from that level. That's the best I was able to extract from here. Uberabois Vayishlach Perek Ayin Vav Al Pasakim Bemakli Avarti Asayardin Azeh. Look at Medrash Rabbah. So I looked up this Medrash Rabbah when Yaakov says, "With my staff I crossed the Jordan." So the Medrash says we see from 3 places that the Jews crossed the Jordan in the merit of Yaakov. That through the merit of Yaakov, the Jewish people crossed the Jordan. And one of the places is because it says, "Ki b'makli avarti," with my staff I crossed. And Yaakov is saying, so this is referring to later that the Jewish people crossed with the staff of Yaakov. So what does this mean? What does he want from it? When we say the Jewish people are, I think, again, possible. The Jewish people crossing the Jordan, and it says Yaakov Makli, Yaakov is crossing the Jordan. bimakli, and through that he's bringing the Jewish people across the Jordan. The Jewish people crossing the Jordan and going into Eretz Yisrael is an elevation to the Jewish souls, and this elevation is happening through the makel, which is indicating the same idea that makel is the idea. Makel is the same idea as matos, firm heart, which is an elevation. That matos is an elevation of the soul. Maybe the makli itself, the going of the Yarden, crossing the Yarden means to go past the various different borders and rise up into the level of makel and mate. Could be, again. Look, the Tzemach Tzedek says, look at the Biur, which in the Pasuk, so I looked this up. It's in the Biur. There's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe called Ali Be'er Enula. And the Jewish people sang a song a few weeks ago, Parshas Chukas, about the Be'er, and it says in the end, that this Be'er, this wellspring that came along with the Jewish people in the Midbar, was carved out by Moshe and Aaron, and they did it through their staffs, b'mishanoisam, with their staffs. So over there he explains the quality of the staff. And he says the staff is very powerful. Mishanoisam is very powerful. We find by Elisha that Elisha made Tchias HaMesim, made the resurrection with a staff. He resurrected when he wanted to. He didn't in the end. He didn't, but that was the intention. When the Shunamis came running to him crying that her child died, I think it was the Shunamis. Maybe the Shunamis is the first story, and this is the other woman. The woman who lost her child, he blessed her, and then she lost her child, and then she came running to Elisha, and Elisha sent Gehazi, his servant, and he said, take the staff and put it on the child. And it would have worked, but Gehazi messed up because he told him not to answer anybody, and Gehazi did. And because of that, he ruined that thing. But whatever it was, the staff could have made Tchias HaMesim. So you see, the staff's very powerful. So in that mimer, the Alter Rebbe explains as follows. What's the secret of the? So he explains like this. Mamish adds this idea. He explains that the beginning of the pasuk over there, Ali Be'er, is talking about Be'er is referring to this. The spring is referring to the Jewish people. They're called the spring of water. And Eli Be'er in the Neshamas, Eli Be'er means rise. Be'er is the rising of Jewish souls. Our souls rising very, very, very high into a very, very deep connection to God. And he says that rising has to do with the fact that only Neshamas are called Mahalchim. Souls are called walkers. Angels, they're called stationary beings. Because the angels have a ceiling where they cap out. It's as far as they can go. They can't break out. They can't break out of the system. They can't free themselves. They can go up higher within the system. They can stimulate incredible energies from the very, 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 very high levels of the system, but they always remain capped in the system. And only Jewish souls are able to break free completely, liberate themselves totally from the system and reach the Ein Sof. And that's why neshamas are called mahalchim. They're called walkers and goers because they can move. Through what? Through what we explained earlier is the love of b'choma odcha, this reusa daliba, this transcendental love, the fire, the madness of the soul, that liberates the soul and takes the neshama into the Ein Sof. That's why that's called walking. But he says there is walking. And then there is a walking stick. A walking stick makes you walk. You go out. As you can see, I like hiking a lot. I do a lot of outside walking. And I actually just got myself a pair of hiking sticks because my knees are really, really hurting me. And the hiking sticks help a lot. So a staff, a stick, you're walking. A stick helps to walk. People walk a long distance. With a stick, you can walk. So he explains, what does it mean, the stick? So he explains it in spirituality. It's the same idea we learned earlier. We learned earlier, how do you activate this, the makifim element of your neshama? How do you activate this Ein Sof energy. How do you stimulate the fire of the soul? That's madness. How do you set yourself off on this infinite journey? You first have to upload a spark. You first have to upload a spark. The sparks of Tohu, they're the ones that register into this infinite light, and they then serve as the igniter of the soul that can ignite the infinite. And he says that's the idea of a staff. Because the staff, he says, is referring to, staff is what you lean on. So it's connected to the Zvulun part of the Jewish people. They're called Tamchin. We learned about it in the Maimer in the two classes ago. Not last class, but 2 classes ago. Class number 2. We learned that Zvulun is stronger than Yisachar, even though Yisachar is the ones who study Torah. And the Zvulun are the merchants. But they're the Torah supporters, and they're called Tamchin Dairaisa. So they are like the staff. And why are they called a support? Simply they support because they give money so the people of Yisachar can learn. But it's really much deeper than that. They give the unique soul energies to the Yisachar Jews because the Yisachar Jews don't deal with the raw energies. They don't access the sparks of Tohu so much because they're not dealing with the materials of the world. But the Jews who go out and work every day, the business people, they're the ones who come into contact and they give tzedakah. So they liberate these sparks and they pass it on to the rabbis, to the clergy people. They give it to the priests. They give it to the learners, to the scholars. They empower their souls that they too can walk. And they're called the staff. Mishanoisa. So what do you see from, and that's why he says, Gehazi took his staff. Because in order to do Tchias HaMesim, to resurrect the dead, you can only resurrect the dead from an infinite power of life. Where life is limited, death can take effect. We know that death can take effect under the Eitz Hadas. Where did death come from? Eitz Hadas, Tov Ra. Because from the world of limitation, from the world of limited service, as we spoke earlier, Eitz Hadas service means serving God with the limitations of one's own perception, understanding, comprehension. So from that level, you can be inspired, but just like your inspiration and your dedication to God dies out, so that can cause that one's attachment to God dies out, and that leads to spiritual death, which translates into physical death. So as long as and that's the system today, and that's why people die. But we know when Mashiach comes, we're going to live forever because we're going to serve God with limitless connection. So we're going to access then the limitlessness of the divine. The Soviv Kalalma, the encompassing energy is going to be revealed. And when that happens, then even dead things come alive. There's no death anymore. So in order to bring about the resurrection of this baby, Elisha needed to activate Soviv Kalalman. So what did he use? He didn't send along Gehazi, a scholar. He gave him a staff, because the staff is the walking stick. That's what enables us to walk, which walking means to transcend, to leave where we are, to move to a complete different place, to touch the infinite, and from there draw down the energy to resurrect the child. But what do you see, just bottom line from all of this, that the staff represents the power, the connection to the Soviv Kalalman, the transcendental powers of the Ein Sof. And that's conveyed in the hardness and the stiffness and the strength of the staff. So this all supports this idea that we're learning about now. And who reveals it? That's Moshe Rabbeinu, going back. Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos. And another source he gives, B'shivri lechem b'pidish mata lechem. Look in the Maimer B'shivri lechem Parshas B'chukoisai. So in Parshas B'chukoisai, in the Maimer B'shivri lechem mata lechem, he also makes reference over there. There it's talking about one of what seems to be a terrible curse. It's amongst the teichacha, amongst the rebuke. And it says over there that Hashem says that you're going to be during the time of when bad days will come, when the darkness will come, the time of exile, and we know this happened during the time of the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. There will be such hunger and a famine because of the siege that they will lay upon the city that you won't have any bread. So 10 women together will gather, and they will bake their breads all in one oven. Usually usually, a one woman baking bread for a family fills a whole oven. Here, they're hardly going to have. So you're only going to have so little wood. So the time you'll be able to 10 women together are going to have that little dough to bake the bread. And there it says also, that's what it means. When I'm going to break your bread support, you're going to be so poor. 10 women together are going to bake in one oven. But then, and even then, you're going to have to put your bread on a scale. You're going to have to put your bread on a scale. Why? Because the bread, the wheat, the grains are going to be such bad quality. The flour is going to be such bad quality. So when you bake the breads, the breads are just going to fall into pieces. So then, in order for them to distribute and divide these breads, which didn't even come out normally, they're going to have to take it all and put them on a scale, and then based on that, give everybody a few ounces or whatever. So it seems like a terrible curse. The Alter Rebbe reveals the blessing behind it. He's revealing the spiritual meaning of it. It's a fascinating discourse. We learned it, and I gave a Monday night class on it as well, where he explains that this is not a curse at all. It's talking about when God says, "When I have broke, lechem is the Torah." He says, "When I break the Torah." That's referring to when the luchos, when the tablets were shattered and broken. So then the Torah is going to fall into then which as he explains over there is two levels of Torah: the first tablets and the second tablets. If we would have received the first tablets, we would have had a far more spiritual Torah. Torah would not be talking so much about the material, physical world. The Torah, we would have received the Torah in its spiritual, godly form. And he says, and that level is called the Eitz HaChaim, tree of life. But because for whatever reason it didn't work out, so God broke mate lechem. Lechem is Torah. Mate is staff, but the staff is talking about the Eitz HaChaim, tree of life, not Eitz Hadas. Eitz Hadas is the tree of godliness. It's also branch, but it's not mate. It's not the beginning of its extension. It's shevet. It's farther away. So the Torah lowers itself down. We receive a lesser version of the Torah, where the Torah is broken. Therefore, it comes to us already embedded, invested in material, physical subjects. And as a result of that, if you learn the Torah just as it is, you can learn it and not see the godliness of it. You can just take the shell and not the fruit, not the inner of it. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, the Torah is giving you guidance. What should you do? You have to bake the bread, this broken bread, in order to benefit, to extract its godliness. And how do you bake it? You have to gather all 10 women. These are the 10 powers of your soul. And you meditate and you bake it in one oven. The Alter Rebbe translates as the oven of oneness. You meditate on the oneness of God. And that creates a fire in your soul. And that will break the bread. Bake the bread. And when the bread will be baked, then when you learn Torah, then you're going to put the bread on a scale. And when you put the bread on the scale, what happens when you put something on a scale? You put the weights on the other side, and it lifts the scale up. The Torah is going to be lifted back up to its godly state. And when the Torah is lifted up to its godly state, it'll give you all the spiritual benefits. In other words, had the luchos not been broken, then everybody would learn Torah. They would see God in the Torah. They would feel the godliness. Now it's possible for a person to bolster their ego through Torah study. Because a person is possible to learn Torah and see just the logic, the human logic in it, and not feel the godly light in the Torah. And therefore we have to make an effort. We have to take all the 10 women, that's the 10 powers of our soul, because the soul is female, and turn on the oven of oneness, put the bread in it, and as a result of that, lift the Torah back to its source. And then the Torah, only the Alter Rebbe can give us such an incredible makeover, because the Alter Rebbe himself lifted the Torah up to its source, and he can see the Torah in its Eitz HaChaim version. And it's not a curse, and it's only a remedy, and it's only light, and it's only blessing. But what do you see from there? That the word mate is referring to the Torah as it is in an Eitz HaChaim state. That's what he's proving from here. Before it collapsed. So the concept of mate is, So when it says Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos, it's talking about a very sublime level of soul, a very high level of neshama, Eitz HaChaim, which in general, again, is associated with ourselves before we go down and become part of the world. We're above the world, the part of the neshama that's higher. Gam Mate, and now the Tzemach Tzedek, so we have three interpretations of Mate. Re'usa Daliba, yearning of the madness of the soul. Eitan, strong, firm, stubbornness. Eitz HaChaim, tree of life. And now the fourth explanation, Gam Mate Loshen Memshala, dominion, Shrada, and ministering. Like it says, we brought the Pasuk by Mashiach, the strength, which I think means when this level of soul is revealed in us, we're a minister over all challenges. We're above it all. We have control. Nothing can even confront us. You're ministering over Elokim. So the lower part of the neshama, you're still under the influence of Elokim. And there's a fight. But when you're above it, sarisa malakim, you're above Elokim. Again, same idea, the higher levels of the neshama. So from all of this, we can understand, Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who conducts. Vayedaber means he leads, he opens us up. Moshe is the one that brings and reveals this level of soul connection, this deep attachment. Okay, till here, I think, or maybe to the last line, is but again, it's my own thought, but it's almost positive. This is all the additions of the Tzemach Tzedek. And L'chura, it should have had a parentheses. That's what I would think. But it's not here, B'Poel, in the Likutei Torah. And now he continues on the main part of the Maimer. Now, where the Alter Rebbe saying, so again, all these interpretations we spoke about today, it's all nuances in the same idea. That, again, the whole theme of the Maimer was the human being is a being of tikkun, which means we exist on the one hand with a great advantage over all the rest of the creation is that we have a higher, uninterrupted, godly consciousness. We're from the world of repair. We're from the world of rectification. Our essence is not shattered and broken. At our core, we have a connection to God, essential. And we have, therefore, an ability. But, on the other hand, we're weaker than all of creation because we're within the system of tikkun, and that's already mitigated and filtered and limited and far diminished energies, as opposed to the toe elements, which are very, very powerful. And by lifting up the sparks of toe, engaging with all the other lower things in this world, we elevate these sparks up, and then we bring even to the divine manifestation called the supernal man above, we bring him food, and we eat that food, and it strengthens us and really raises up the soul to the transcendental powers of the soul through Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the idea of Vayedaber Moshe. And why are we talking about suddenly? Why is this all such a subject of our interaction with the world? Because again, this Maimer is talking about vows. And a vow means an abstinence of interaction with even what is permissible. So first we have to understand why it's important not to abstain from the permissible things in life, because it's only through our being consumers of the physical material world that we can access these great riches, that we can access the powerful powers of Samach Gimel. So we really need it. But again, he just gave you the technical element of how it all works. Once we elevate sparks, and through Moshe Rabbeinu, we connect to the Mata element, which is the firmness that's above the regular self of Tikkun. It's related to already activating the toe as it influences us. Now the Pasuk says, what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? What does Moshe say? Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Matos, and what does he say to them? Zeh hadavar asher tziva havaya. This is the matter that God commanded. So the Alter Rebbe interprets an amazing pshat. He says like this: as long as we are living in the system, as long as we're inspired not through Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not connected to the Moshe, We feel that we can be a good Jew without a Rebbe, without Moshe, without the input of this powerful energy that lifts us into transcendence. As long as we're operating, a good Jew, but everything is, So then, the Rebbe says, you're living in time and space. You're part of the system. You're living in time and space. And when you're living in time and space, then the Torah that you're studying is an old Torah. What do we mean it's an old Torah? It's an ancient Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, who said the Torah, receiving it from God, said those words 3,500 years ago. To be more accurate, love saying it this year, 3333. That's how long ago Moshe Rabbeinu said these words. Very, very powerful. You're repeating. Okay, we're quoting statements and teachings that were said 3,300. They're still potent. They're still powerful because Moshe said them. But it's not Moshe's words. It's your words. You're quoting what you heard from him, or you're quoting it straight from the Chumash, but whatever it is, it's a long time has passed because you're living in time and space. But the Alter Rebbe says what Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching you over here is if you're plugging into Moshe and you're allowing Moshe Rabbeinu therefore to open you up to the transcendental part, to your tree of life element, to your Eitan of your Neshama, to the Re'usa the Liba, to the yearning of the soul, that's beyond time and space. There is no time there. And since there is no time there, Moshe Rabbeinu is now speaking these words, and when you're speaking, you are speaking Moshe's words. You're not repeating, you're not quoting Zeh Hadavar, because you're outside of time. So Moshe is now, Moshe is alive. This is higher than the whole system. This is divine, and therefore it's beyond time and space. So the Pasuk says, Vayedaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos Lemor, so that what's the benefit of Vayedaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos Lemor, that we can say Zeh Hadavar, the actual word that Moshe is saying, we can say Zeh. That means this is it. We are actually saying the literal words that Moshe speaks. You and Moses' words are the same words. You're not speaking an old. And imagine the potency of such Torah. Imagine the influence we have in other people. When we're speaking and we're channeling, we're not saying our own words. It's Moshe's words. We're saying, this is similar to what it says. The idea that Zeh Hadavar, that we're speaking the words that God spoke to Moshe, or the words that Moshe is saying. It's similar to the same thing God is asking us in Shema. We say, over there too, it says you shall love God, your God, with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Now, what did we explain earlier? What does it mean, all your might? All your might means get past your mind, get past your connection to God based on your own limitations and our own narrowness. Open up your neshama to the deepest, infinite, transcendental. Become, open up to the madness of your soul, to the koiches makifim of our soul. And then what does it say after that? Right after that, you should study Torah, v'dibarta bam, v'hoyu advarim ha'ela, and it will be these words, asher anoichi mitzavcha, that I am commanding you hayom today. Number one, it's today. God is speaking today. Secondly, v'hoyu advarim ha'ela, these words that God is saying, v'dibarta bam, you should speak, not just you should quote, you should study Torah all the time. V'dibarta bam, speak these literal words. V'dibarta, your word should be bam, the words that I am saying today. You're speaking God's words. Your words are as potent as at Sinai. Sometimes you hear a tzaddik saying words of davening or Torah, and just those words just rip through all the barriers. It's electrifying. It's so powerful. Why? Because his words are not their words. Why? Because they're beyond time and space. What takes you beyond time and space? Only because b'chol ma'odecha. If you would only have loved God with all your heart and with all your soul, that means we would be operating from within time and space. We're operating from within the system because human intelligence is part of the system. So if our inspiration is from human intelligence, it's all part of the system, and therefore we're not transcending, we're not outside the system, we're within the system. But if you should speak in them. Speak what Moshe himself says. What Moshe said 3,000 years ago. Bear, you should say those very words. Literally them. The kol zeh, how can you say those words? Only through the yearning of the heart. Because then you're outside of time and space. Like it says in the Pasuk, my words that I'm putting in your mouth. All the other Nevi'im, and that's why Moshe is unique, he says, because Moshe is outside of time and space. That's why Moshe says, this is the word. The other Nevi'im say, Ko Amar Hashem, so said God. So means, he said something like it, which means I'm quoting. I'm saying, it's not his words exactly. It says, let's create man bitsalmenu in our form, kidmusenu in our image. In our form is literally our form. Kidmusenu is already a copy. So the other prophets are like a copy. It's not the real. It's not the original. Only Moshe is the original. But he's explaining how Moshe can open that up in our soul. Okay. Now that we understand that, so what does this all have to do with vows? Ishki Yidor Neder. So we're going to learn now the last piece, Siv Dalet. So now that we understand the importance of the powers of Tohu, the powers of the infinite, which we again connect as a result of our uploading a spark of holiness, and then Moshe has something he can work with us. Then he can channel to us these potent energies of Tohu. So the Pasuk now continues, and it says, Ishki Yidor Neder, when a man will make a vow. So here's the thing. Why would someone take a vow? Now, what does a vow mean? A vow means abstaining from things that are kosher. Things that are not kosher, you're not allowed to eat anyways. You don't need a vow for that. Torah doesn't let. A vow was usually taken. For someone who had a hard time with some kind of an overly attachment to things. It can be many reasons. A person feels that they're addicted, they're experiencing a food addiction. That would be the classic example. Like a person has a smoking addiction or a drinking addiction. They're an alcoholic, and so they feel that it's ruining them. That's on the most simplest of levels. But it could be on a level where a person is way beyond that. They have control, they're not. But in general, they feel they're too materialistic. Not that they are they're super gluttonous and super animalistic and they can't control themselves at all, and therefore they need a vow. But even if they're on a higher level, and they do have, but they feel that their involvement with the material is too much, and it's impacting their spiritual lives. As they're becoming desensitized to spirituality because of the over physical stimulation, which has impact because the physical is dangerous. You have to understand that. It's dangerous in the sense that, as we spoke earlier, it's toxic waste with an enormous potential spark, but it's toxic waste. And as we engage in it, it blurs our soul. It covers, it obscures. That's why a person is very, very likely, if they indulge and they don't make a bracha properly and don't really, are not really careful, that as a result of overindulgence we become coarse, and we can, God forbid, it leads a person to sin. We have many. So that's another level. A person will take a vow to disconnect. Now a third level, even higher than that. No. It's not the food, the material things are not corrupting me yet. No. But I don't feel that I have the power to elevate. And if I'm not going to elevate the spark, then I might as well leave it as it is, because if I don't elevate, I sometimes can downgrade. Sparks of holiness are waiting. They're waiting to be elevated. An amazing story I heard last week from the Holy Ruzhiner. The Holy Ruzhiner traveled to a city and came to an inn, Suddenly came, he used to travel a lot, and he came to a town, and Rebbe came, whatever, the person was very excited, so the Ruzhiner said to him, come with me to the window. And they were looking outside the window, and the Ruzhiner was asking him about everybody that's passing, who is this, who is this, who is that. Suddenly a person went by drinking beer. The guy was without a kippah. You can see he's Jewish, without a kippah, he's drinking beer. A bottle of beer. So the Ruzhiner asked him, who's this? So he told him, oh, it's very sad. This person's father was a special man, a good man, very, 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 dedicated to, God-fearing man, a good Jew. Sadly, his son just, didn't do well and went off the path. And he's not too religious, as you can see. He's not too observant. He walks without the kippah and so on and so forth. So the Ruzhiner had this guy be called in front of him. And he told him a story. He said there was once a person who passed away. He tells this guy without the kippah, he says, there was once a person who passed away. And when he came up to the other world, they judged him. And turns out that he was half and half. It turns out very rarely that someone should come out exactly half virtuous and half sinful. But since he was exactly half, they had to decide, what are they going to do with this person? So they gave him two options. One is that he can go into Gehenna, he can go to purgatory, and clean up a little bit of the sins, and then his virtues are going to be more than his sins, and then he can, or he can be reincarnated. And the person knew that reincarnation is too dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. Be reincarnated coming out into this world. I don't know if reincarnated in thing, but it's very, very painful. No. He says, he'll go. He took option A. We'll go to purgatory. It'll be, we'll go through it quickly and then done. Okay. So the way I heard the story told is that the angels are taking him. And as he's walking towards there, he has an escort. These guys are they're called Malachi Chabola. These are not the angels that you want to hang out with. And they're escorting him. And it feels like days and weeks and months. It feels like forever. They're walking and they're walking and they're walking. And as they're getting, further and further, it's getting warm. It's getting warm. And then it starts getting hot. It's getting like unbearably hot. And he's sure, okay, so it must be that we're already in the vicinity of purgatory because it's so hot. It's like unbearably hot. So he stops and he asks the angels, if we must be there. We're walking already for a year or two, And the angels laugh and they say, not even close. We're so far, we're not even close. They laugh at him how he thinks they're close. Okay, so they continue. At this point, they move forward. And again, it feels like forever. It's getting so hot that he feels like his hair is falling off his body. Whatever, obviously a soul is different than body, but it's like, it's not, so he's sure we're right at the entry. They laughed. They said, we're not even halfway there. So when he realized what's going on, he said to the angels, excuse me, he says, I think, can we still do option B? So they sat on a bench and the other angel went back. Okay, obviously, what is it? Or maybe they radioed in and they told him, they could bring him back. Anyways, they brought him back and they sent him down. Option B. So he was incarnated in a field in a barley, in a grain of barley. And he says he's out there and he's whatever, and the sun and this and that, and he's suffering, and they're cutting barley. And when they cut the barley, so many of the grains go under the people that are cutting. They're not with the machine. Some of it gets picked up, others get just trampled by the feet. It's finally and he's watching and he sees there's a lot of souls. Now, he's not the only soul there. And he's waiting and waiting. Hopefully they're going to pick him up so they can do something with this barley. And he watches different souls get flung around and not being picked up. And he's lucky, he suddenly gets in. And he's now in the barley. And then they took the barley, and in the wagon, some of it falls out. And he's like, his neighbor's been falling out, this barley, but he's holding on for dear life, hoping. Finally, he comes to the maize place, and they start grinding it. And so many of the things get... Anyways, he's lucky. He ends up being the barley that gets mixed and he ends up in the bottle in a vat of beer. Oh, he's already closer to something. And then the vats get sold. I think someone came to buy like a lot of beer for his, and it's a Gentile. And now he's terrified because all this he's been through the barley, he's been through. And he ends up in this non-Jewish tavern, and it's full of Gentiles that are coming drinking over there. And now what he's going to be eating, and he gets put on, and he goes into a bottle. The guy fills the bottles of beer, and he puts them on the shelf. And people coming one after another, and they're buying and they're drinking beer, and they're drunkard, and they're shouting and vulgar, and this. Then he realizes, oh my God, there's no tikkun over here. He's not only going to be dragged down even lower than he was before. Suddenly, there is one Jew. There's 2 more bottles left. That's what it is, 2 more bottles left. And a Jew walks in. And the Jew walks in, and he asks the guy who wants to buy a bottle of beer. And the guy said, I don't have much left. There's 2 bottles over there. And he's looking, Jew walked in. And there's 2 bottles. Which one to take? And bingo! The guy picked up the bottle with this barley, with this neshama. Oh my, he's celebrating. He's like, wow, he ended up, how lucky, couldn't believe every other bottle went to a Gentile, and only he went to a Jew. And he's waiting, the Jew will make a blessing, and so on and so forth. And the Holy Roshei turns to him and he says, well, you just drank your father without making a blessing, without a yarmulke on your head. I hope he had still a tiny little bit of beer left over when he told him that. Bottom line story is that when we see physical things, there's a lot going on there. We don't know the stories of everything, but we have to have a sense of awe before we touch something. We have to be able to elevate. Now, what happens when someone makes a vow is that the person realizes that maybe I'm not on a level that I can elevate. And if I don't eat it the right way or use the energy the right, I'll only drag it down. And as a result of that, the person wants to abstain. But if you abstain from things, you're never going to gain the gain of tohu, and you're also not going to elevate the spark, which is the greatest thing that we can do for this world, the purpose of. So the Alter Rebbe is going to explain over here that making a vow is not just to abstain from something, but through a vow, you actually can also elevate the spark to the making of the vow itself is actually lifting the spark up to its source. Even when you're not consuming it. So again, the best way to elevate something is to make a blessing and be a mensch yourself. Because a human, in order to elevate something, you have to be human. Again, we said earlier, the power to elevate is from the world of tikkun. The human is tikkun, is connected. You have connected consciousness. But you have to eat the object, the food, from a space of purposefulness. If you're engaging the food as an animal and not as a human, in other words, you're activating within yourself your animalistic self. That's what you're excited about the food. There's no purposefulness in the approach that one has to the food. When we're doing that, then we're like a cow eating, like the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov once showed his students an amusing sight. He showed them on Shabbos that there was a group of, there was someone, he showed them on Shabbos, Baal Shem Tov was able to give a vision to them. He would put his hands on their shoulders and they would suddenly see what he sees. And the Baal Shem Tov shows them something that was like very funny. They watching an ox, literally a cow, and he's wearing the shtreimel. And they can't figure this out. What's an ox doing with the shtreimel? And the Baal Shem Tov explained. Maybe the Baal Shem Tov rewind the video and let them see the story. What they saw was a person sitting down, a guy, he was a rabbi, and he sat down with he's wearing a kapata, a bekeshe, whatever it was, and a shtreimel. He was a nice fellow, a Jew, is obviously an important. And he sits down with a plate of cholent, and he's got meat in there. And he's so excited about the food that he's eating it with such. And as he's reaching for the meat and he starts eating the meat, remember the Baal Shem Tov teaches that wherever your thought is, that's where you're at. That's who you are, what you are. So at that moment, he became so connected to the meat that he's identifying with the cow, that he himself is a cow. So the Baal Shem Tov says, what you're seeing is this guy, the cow is not wearing a shtreimel. This rabbi is wearing the shtreimel. But he has now become a cow. But his shtreimel doesn't change. So the shtreimel remained a shtreimel. And he says, look how funny it looks. A cow with a shtreimel. So here's the thing. If when we're eating meat or drinking wine or whatever it is, or drinking beer, we're gluttonous, we're popping the beer bottle and drinking it like that, like general, like Jews shouldn't do that, should always pour it into a cup. But we're behaving more like an animal. And that's how we eat it. We're not elevating anything. How can you test it? How do you know if you look like a human and you look like an animal? I'm not recommending this. But if you climb over the cage in the polar bear section or in the lion den, and the lions don't bother you in the zoo, then you know you look like a human. Because animals are surrendered to the human. The human is the king of the jungle, the king of the world. But as long as the human looks like human, tzaddikim were not touched by, like Daniel we know in the lion's den, and other tzaddikim, the Roshei HaKadosh, there's a story, and others. They couldn't be hurt by animals because animals saw in them that they're human. But when we don't look like human, then we can't elevate. Oh, but what do we do? So the best way would be to be able to be a mensch and to be able to elevate. But if we can't, by making and saying a vow, that itself could create the what is needed to lift this spark up and elevate it to Tohu. How does that work? So the Alter Rebbe reveals a secret about the vow. So first we have to know an interesting halacha about a vow. What's the halacha? It's a halacha regarding a vow. It's a law. When a person says, I'm not going to eat meat, that's not a vow. That's an oath. A vow means the meat is forbidden to me. The meat is forbidden to me. And you know what happens? Something happens to the meat. The meat changes. A person can cause an effect on the meat. The meat changes. It's prohibited. It's like it's holy. Now, it's only forbidden to the person. Another person could eat it. But whatever holiness it is holy to you. You can't eat it. When you're taking a vow, the thing doesn't change when you make a vow. No, I'm sorry, not a vow. When you're making an oath, the thing doesn't change. The prohibition is on you. You are not allowed to eat that thing. But in a vow, the object is forbidden to you. And that's because you change the spiritual dynamic of that object. You've changed it. And that's why the halacha is that in order that a vow should work, you have to say that this thing is forbidden to me like something else. Because you want to affect this. This should become, you compare it to something else, and as a result of that, just like this is prohibited, this is also prohibited. However, there's an important rule, that the thing you're comparing it to has to be something that is made holy by a person, made prohibited by a person. You can't say this should be forbidden to me like lobster. You can't say this should be forbidden to me like ham, like pork or whatever. Because those things are not prohibited by human action, by human speech. Those things are prohibited by God. And therefore, the thing that you're prohibiting is not by God, you're prohibiting. So you have to compare it to something that becomes forbidden to the person by human decree. What is that? A sacrifice. An animal is a regular animal. It's a regular, ordinary animal. It's a regular sheep. It's amongst your flock of sheep. Or it's a regular goat, or it's a regular cow. Kosher, no problem. If you shecht it, you'll slaughter it properly, you'll clean it, you'll get rid of the blood and do whatever it is, kosher. You go to this animal and you say, this animal should be consecrated to the temple. The moment you say that, the animal becomes consecrated, becomes holy. You're not allowed to use it for mundane. You can only offer it as a sacrifice. So when you're saying this thing should be forbidden, this piece of cake or this meat should be, this bottle of wine should be forbidden to me, you have to say this should be forbidden like that. They used to have a special wording for it. They would say konem. Konem is like korban. This is like a korban, and it becomes prohibited, becomes separated from you. So now the question is, so you're affecting something. So you see that in a vow, there is actually impact on it like a korban. But how does a korban work? So the Alter Rebbe is going to say, when we analyze how a korban works, how a sacrifice works, we can then understand how a vow works. The dynamics of a korban will apply to a vow. Now you can wonder, so what are the dynamics of a korban? So we understand the korban is holy because you put it on the altar, and that makes it holy. Some of them, the whole thing was burnt, others just the blood and the fat was burnt, whatever it is, but it's going up. That's not what makes it holy. That's the ultimate holiness. Actually, if you take an animal and you bring it to the altar and you offer it, you can be, I think it's punishable by, if in purpose, I think it's punishable by death. I brought a korban, no. It's called chulin ba'azara. Chulin ba'azara means a mundane animal you can't make. The only way you can offer it is by first consecrating it. In other words, you first have to declare it's holy. Who declared? You have to go to a rabbi? You have to go to, I don't know who? You have to go to the Kohen Gadol? No. Any Jew has the power to say, this is consecrated. And then the bird, whatever, not all animals could become a korban, but whichever animals are eligible for the altar, if you declared it first, then it becomes holy, and then it can be consecrated. What? So what do you see from there? That the real secret of making something from mundane holy is through human declaration. What's the power of a human's mouth? A human's words? And the Rebbe is going to say that's the power of the vow. The human being has an extraordinary power with his words to elevate things and make them holy. And similar to that, when we're making a vow, we're elevating it. The spark is being elevated to its source. We're disconnecting it from the klippas that are infesting it. By declaring it holy, we cause the klippa to let go of it. We allow the object to become holy and connect to its source without eating it, without touching it. That's the chiddush of the house. Now let's understand that a little better. This idea that we go and we consecrate something and we make it holy by our words of our mouth, why does it need two stages? Why can't you just take it initially and bring it to the altar? What is affected by your declaration it's holy, and what is affected by it being later brought on the altar? And if it's already holy by you declaring it, why do you have to offer it on the altar? You've already elevated it. So you have to say it's two stages of elevation. Stage one, you consecrate it. Stage two, offering it. So what is that? So what's the word we use for this idea of consecrating something? It's called making it hegdish. Hegdish means making it holy, or being makadesh something. Now, sanctifying it, making it holy. Where else do we use that term, mekadesh? Well, today I'm going to a wedding. May this class be a schus for the chassan and the kala. I don't know her name. I know her name is Elsa. I forgot his name. Yaakov? I'm not sure. Any case, may this be a schus for the chassan and the kala. Rivka. Her Hebrew name is Rivka. I think his name is Yitzchak, yeah. So I think it's Rivka and Yitzchak. Very special. In any case, so a wedding, we know, is called Mekadesh Ama Yisrael, the Chuppah V'Kedushin. And the act of a man betrothing the woman is called Kedushin. Now, so let's take a look at the wedding. We know there are two stages to a wedding. The first stage of a wedding is called Kedushin. It's the man giving the ring to the woman. They do that on today's day. They used to do it not under the chuppah. Today's days we do it under the chuppah. Stage two is called Nisuyin, fully married. And that involves, of course, the intimacy of a husband and a wife. But first, there has to be Kedushin. What is the idea behind it? So the idea is an amazing thing. Man is mashpia. Man and woman is recipient. Woman represents vessels, containers. Man represents energy. Energy on the outer revealed level, energy is much higher than containers. Man, therefore, is much higher than woman. In order for there to be a bond and a unification between the man and the woman, to the point where the two of them are married and they're one, she doesn't have the capacity to be able to bond with such a powerful energy. Just like that. It will overwhelm her, it will completely destroy her spiritually. So it has to be done in increments. And that's the idea of a ring. When the husband and wife stand under the chuppah, when bride and groom stand under the chuppah, when he takes the ring and putting it on her, he's actually bestowing of himself to her. He's channeling to her. He's not just giving a physical ring. The physical ring is an expression. It's a revelation of something very powerful that's being transmitted from him to her. What is he transmitting to her? He's transmitting to her an ormakif, an encompassing light. That means like this. She's not ready to internalize his energy. She's not ready yet. In order to season her, to get ready for his light, he first has to bestow an encompassing energy on her. And when he bestows the encompassing energy of her, that lifts her up to a much higher level. Once she's lifted up to a much higher level, after that, they can have the intimacy in which he will draw down to her internalizing energy, in which she will completely become one with him. So she will internalize his light, and husband and wife can become one. It must go first in two stages. And what the makif does, the encompassing energy, which is called the kedushin, is it gives her it buzzes her with powerful light that just shakes her up and elevates her. It's an elevator. It elevates the woman to a higher state, and then they can move into the next stage. In our relationship with God, we got that buzzer 3,000 years ago by the giving of the Torah. God buzzed us with that light. We haven't reached the intimacy until Mashiach. See how long it's taking? It's taking us 3,000 years to open up, to be able to receive the ultimate union with God that happens in the days of Mashiach. The Nesuya. But with a husband and a wife, within a few hours, they can have the wedding, the joy of the wedding. But the main thing is, he gives her the ring. Now, by giving her the ring, he also makes a statement. He says, you are consecrated to me. You are sanctified to me. You are holy to me. Hareyat mekudeshesli. He must say it. Without words, it doesn't work. He has to say it with his mouth. Why? Because the or makif comes from the mouth. When he speaks to her, he gives her this encompassing light, giving her the ability to go up. The same is true, same idea applies also when a human is consecrating and bringing a sacrifice of the animal to God. The animal doesn't have that ability for its elevation immediately. So it comes in two stages. First, by the man declaring it holy, he provides the makif, lifts the animal up from its lowliness, and only afterwards, when he brings it as a korban, that's by the korban, then the energy of the animal is going up all the way to the Lord and internalizing and getting the pneumius and drawing it down. I just give the introduction on the entire piece. It's going to be very quick now when we read it inside. So in a vow, let's just connect it to a vow, you don't have the second part of the sacrifice itself. You don't have that second part of the union because you're not eating it, you're not connecting to it, but at least you have stage number one in which you're providing the makif on the food or the object, whatever you're taking a vow from, and you're lifting it up to its source. When you're ready to elevate, because you yourself have become fully human and therefore not attached to the material world, and therefore you can elevate the material world when you're not part of it, then you can elevate it. Then you'll be ready for the next stage of actually ending the abstinence and be involved in the physical things. Let's read inside. Ishki yedar neder, sheyader bedavar an nadur. So the rule is, I told you earlier, that you have to make a neder in something that you have to make a vow with something that is made holy through a vow. Shedavar an nadur kamay korban. You compare it to a sacrifice. How does a sacrifice work by this, through this, that you make it holy with your mouth? And afterwards, afterwards, when you offer it as a sacrifice, what happens is the opposite. You first elevate the animal by consecrating it, and then once the animal is taken to the altar, it does the opposite. It elevates the human. It pulls you up, as we spoke earlier, to the lights of Tohu, to the powerful, and therefore it enriches a person's service that you can connect to the powerful things that we spoke earlier, that Moshe Rabbeinu channels to your soul, but it has to come only through an upload, and the upload is through the carbon. And the energies of Tohu that are now transmitted to the neshama, like it says, Tamim Yeh, that the animal, Tamim, is complete, and it will bring and it will be to favor you in front of God, which means it will connect you to the level of Ratzon, which is Keser, which is infinite. And it also says, their burnt offerings, and their other offerings, sacrifices, is received by me to my will, which means, again, the transcendental lights of Tohu, al mizbechi, on my altar. And then it lifts you up into that place. But why do you have to make a korban? Why do you have to sanction a korban or consecrate it first? With your mouth. Even though the animal has a higher root than the human, it is rooted in where Hashem's mouth originates, as we spoke earlier, in the mouth of Adam Kadmon, in the very, very high level. Pi Hashem ha'olam ha'toyu, which is the world of Toyu. But because it fell down below in the shattered vessels, it's not capable to lift itself up to its source. It's only through this that a person who has a godly soul. And the animal has such an amazing source, but it's disconnected from it, and it is incapable of reconnecting to its source only through the person. The person is from the world of Tikkun, like we learned earlier. He's from the name of 45, which is Gematria Adam, that purifies, that sorts it all out. And he has to sanctify it first. And as making it holy, you bestow upon it in an encompassing light, through the mouth. That's the rule, that from a person's speech creates or makif. Like it's stated elsewhere in a different mimer. On the Pasuk, I will give my words into your mouth, yadi, and in the shadow of my hand, kisisicha, I've covered you. So over there it explains that these are not two separate things, but one thing is derived from the other. I put my words in your mouth, that's speech, and from there comes the shadow of my hand, which is the makif. You see from here that from human speech it creates an or makif. It's one of the things that we learn right in the beginning, when we study Chassidus just as an amateur, the beginning Chassidus, the 5th parak in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains how mitzvahs are called garments to the soul, and Torah is called food for the soul. But he says Torah is greater than all the mitzvahs because Torah has both benefits. It's also food, internalized energy, and it's also makif, it also is encompassing energy. He explains the intellectual grasp of Torah is the food, it's the internalization of it, and the words of Torah, speaking it verbally, creates makif energies, creates encompassing energies. So you see from there that from human speech, you create encompassing energies. Look in the Maimer, Misam Pella Adam, which I looked up before, where over there he explains this idea how speech create our makif. He goes through a long explanation over there, how Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, that who gave the power of Atzilus, of the Adam Elyon, the supernal man, to be able to speak and to create makifim. I don't remember all the details over there, but a very rich idea which he discusses over there. V'or makif magbia, and what does the or makif do? V'or makif magbia umayla. The or makif acts as an elevator. When you bring makif down on something, it like lifts you up. And what does that mean? So, when you look up that Maimer, Pashas Miketz, Chanukah Maimer, over there he explains how, same idea that we just mentioned, that Torah is internal energy, mitzvahs are encompassing energy, and he says encompassing energies, what they do is even though it's not lasting, but it does give us, initially, I mean, obviously, we're learning over here, the ultimate is to connect to the encompassing energies. But we're talking about encompassing energies that doesn't come as the final state of achievement. It comes as a preliminary. It's like boosting us with an encompassing energy, a burst of encompassing energy to trigger a person, to fire up the person. So the idea of it is that, he explains over there, is that mitzvahs are encompassing energies. And therefore, when a person is so disconnected and so lost and so not, and you try to speak to them, they're completely clogged. So you have to do with them a mitzvah. You know, one of the things that the Rebbe introduced one of the most amazing things is mitzvayim. Mitzvayim is to go around the world, all over, wherever we travel, wherever we go, meet Jews and do a mitzvah, put on tefillin with them, have them light Shabbos candles, whatever it is, a mitzvah. So sometimes people ask, when you do one mitzvah, what have you impacted the person? Sometimes it's only the mitzvah that will, talking to them the words will go in one ear, go out the other, they're not kalim. But a mitzvah, what does a mitzvah do? It lifts them up from where they are, it envelops them in holiness. And the idea the Alter Rebbe explains, that's why we put on talis and tefillin every morning, and we pray with our talis and tefillin for a man. Why do you pray with a talis and a tefillin? Because it sets the stage. The main part of the davening is the meditation and the deep connection you're going to have through thinking and learning in the words of davening. But you need to set the stage. Just came out of bed, just was so physical, so earthy. How do you stand in front of God and suddenly pray and have the purity? The talis and the tefillin provide the makif, which lifts you up. Tzedakah teroimim goy. Also, one of the reasons you're supposed to give tzedakah before you daven. Give tzedakah. It lifts you into a purer, higher place. It's an elevator, and then you'll probably be far more successful into drawing down the or pnimi. That's what he explains over there. This gives koyach lias mis'ala habehema. So when a person stands by an animal and he says, you're going to be consecrated with your words of your mouth, you provide the or makif, it lifts the animal up from the klippas, minoga, from the klippas noga, which is the klippa, uli kolin, and allows the animal to start communicating with its source, b'sharsha, in its source, shema olam atoyu, in the world of toyu, memoitza hapeh, which is from this very, very deep place of where the emanation of Hashem's mouth. And this idea that the Alter Rebbe continues, Adam nimshach b'chenes makifim, that a person's words can create makifim, which is a little strange because the whole idea of human is lights in vessels. It's called the opposite of makifim. It's called yosher. Yosher means energies that go into kalim, into vessels, like direct light, as opposed to circles. Circles are makifim. Human being is yosher. So how does the human being create the makifim? Like we said earlier, in order to get to our own makifim, encompassing energy, we need the animal that brings us to our encompassing energies of our soul. So how come the human, through his speech, will create? So he says that's a mystical idea that we find. It says so already in Eitz Chaim, that from the initial thread, that comes after the tzimtzum, from it come all the circles. This is referring to, I'm going to do this very briefly because I'm running a little later than I thought I would. I elaborated a little too much on all this. Okay, I guess it's for a purpose. Initially when Hashem created the world, there was infinite light that filled the entire space. And then Hashem removed and created this black space, a black hole. And into the black, where he removed his presence, not his real presence, but his revealed presence. So it's just a void and emptiness. And within this black hole, he creates the worlds. How does he create it? He reintroduces a tiny, narrow, little slim, if you can say, a little narrow thread. So according to Kabbalah, that thread, which is on the one hand considered already constricted light, and it's meant to be adjusted, so it's the source of lights that go into vessels. But from it, as it makes its way into the black hole to start creating, it first, before it creates any internal vessels, it first produces encompassing lights and circles, and in each circle, it creates within that circle the sphirot, the attributes, which are the configurations that work, that are the indwelling kind of energy, the internal oidos bekalim within that circle. And then it continues lower, and it creates another circle. So you see from there that the Or Yashar, the Kav and the Chut, the Or Yashar, is the source of Or Makifs. So this would be the same thing, that the human who's really rooted in the concept of Kav and Chut creates the circles. I know that I've given very, very little explanation on this, but for another time. Umakuf, imakifim, ve'egulim. Okay, hold on. Nimshachin, it's drawn in misaglim and in its circles. Ho'agulim umakifim. There's a little error over here. It looks like to me, the comma I think is after the word agulim. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be after the word makifim. That's the only way it makes sense. Umisaglim, agulim, umakifim. To my limited understanding, that misaglim, it causes brings the circles of haigulim, the circles, umakifim, and the encompassing lines. Va'agulim umakifim elu, and these igulim and these makifim, hem makifim gamkein al siyam akav betachtas hayosher, then later become the encompassing lights that encompass everything, even the bottom of the yosher. Why he mentions that, I'm not sure. And similar to that, there is a koyach in a person, which the person's source is in the yosher element, to also draw forth these encompassing lights and circlings, these spheres, which come from the kav, because that's the shorish of the yosher, which is the person. And this is the idea. Through this, that a person consecrates the animal with his mouth. The person draws down into it the makif. Nevertheless, but nevertheless, he only gives to it an or makif. So even if the person is giving he's giving an or makif to the animal, but also even the or makif, he's not getting the pneumius of the makif. He's only, in other words, when the person is saying let this be an animal, he's drawing down from the lights of tohu. But the way I understand it, what it means is the external parts of tohu. In order to activate the real inner energies of tohu, the person has no connection to that. The animal has to be the representative. The animal goes up on the altar, and that reaches the inner parts of tohu, and that in response reciprocates and channels that to the human who elevated the animal. So there is a give and take going on over here, both directions. So the human can draw down from the or makif only the chitzonius of it, the external. But that's needed to shake the animal up from its dark space. The pneumius of the carbon and its life is higher than the person. And maybe that's also the reason he can't reach the pneumius of the animal. That's what it seems like he's saying, is because the pneumius, inner core of the animal, is higher than the person. The person can't reach it. Even while the animal is low, the person can only makif the animal. They can't reach its pneumius because the pneumius of the animal is really higher than the person, connected to the pneumius of the makif that the human can't reach. And the Tzemach Tzedek adds, this is similar to what it says in Eitz Chaim, the Arizal, in the portal of Sfiras HaOmer, Perigimel, which is talking about the mitzvah of counting the Omer. He says over there that when we count the Omer and the blessing we make when we count the Omer, anu mamshichin or makif, we draw down a makif light. General, I just want to say one thing. This idea that before we can elevate something, we first have to zap it we just have to shock it with powerful light. And then by shocking it, it shakes, you kind of knock it out of its smugness, out of its comfort zone. And then it's a vessel. We also find that by a mitzvah. Before you do a mitzvah, you say the blessing on the mitzvah. The blessing on the mitzvah, the sages say, is called oiver layasiyasan. Simply it means you can't make the blessing after the mitzvah it's done, you must do it before. But over also means surrounding. Because by saying the blessing, you zap the object with a powerful makif light that shakes the physical item out of the klipa. The klipas all run away because they're scared of the or makif. They disappear. Then it's free. Then when you do the mitzvah, you're actually engaging it in the final. So the Eitz Chaim says by Sfiras HaOmer, when we count the Omer, we're making a blessing and we're counting. By both these things, we're impacting the animal side, the dark elements in the world with an or makif. Omnam or pnimi, the Eitz Chaim says, ein anu yecholim lahamshach ata. The inner light we can't draw down. Kizelo nimshach rak bezman shebeis hamikdash kayam. This was only drawn when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. Similar to what we're just saying, that a korban, you need a korban to get to the inner element of the makif. So Eitz Chaim says, today's days we can't offer the omer. Omer was a measure of barley they offered at the Beis Hamikdash. We don't have that. So the main pneumistic light, which happened in the time of the temple, we were only able to do it when we had the actual barley, which barley, by the way, an animal is the same thing, because barley is considered fodder. It's considered food for animal. So just like but what we could do is kind of get at least to the external element of the process. But even though we initially, the human, can't impact the animal to the pneumius of it, it doesn't mean that we don't have a connection to it. We do. But for that, it will take the animal actually going on the altar, and then that second stage will happen. Through the korban. And this is the same idea of a neder. Nedarim help you reach abstinence. Why do you want abstinence? Because a person estimates himself, evaluates himself. You're honest with yourself. You realize that you don't have the ability to raise the animal. Imagine if you're drinking the beer and you're drinking, God forbid, your own father. The soul's been waiting for the elevation, and now you knocked it down even darker. When you recognize that you don't have the ability to lift it up to its source, from that very, very sublime source. Why? Through your eating. Why can't you? Because the person realizes that I'm attached to the physical. How can I lift something up into the spiritual if I myself identify with the physical? I'm not a spiritual being. The food is controlling me. I'm not controlling the food. How can I elevate the food? Look in the Ma'amar Kaisav Aruch Pashas Nasi where he discusses this. That's why the person separates from it. So that doesn't mean when you're separating. Therefore, what's the food's fault that you can't elevate? It's begging to be elevated. So it's not like it's all that just because you're not ready you can't deal with it. You could. You're going to activate another method. It's not as great, but at least it's partial repair. You actually do elevate the food. By this that you make a vow, which means a vow of abstinence. But you don't just make a vow pushing it away. You're saying it should be consecrated like something that is a korban. Let this be like a korban. Through this, he draws down the makif like mishar shayhanaila from its very, very high source, from the source of the mouth. And that's why Chazal say, it's a sefri, it's a medrash, sefri, where the sefri says anybody that makes a neder, it's like a vow shouldn't be taken lightly. A vow is like you're making a vow in the life of the king. What does it mean, of the life of the king? So he's going to explain it just Kabbalistically. Since a vow activates makif, he says all makifim are associated with the power of bina. Bina is the source of makifim. We know sukkahs, for instance, we sit under a sukkah, which is an ur makif. We know it's called makifim, the bina. Bina is called makif because it's makif, I think, over the emotions. The emotions are internal energy, and intellect is considered makif compared to the emotions, particularly bina. Now, so he says, Bina is called Chaye HaMelech, the life of the king. Obviously, we're talking about God, the king, the life of the king, which life of the king is higher than the king. So let's understand what that means. Shechina is called the queen. Sometimes it's called the king, but Shechina. The Ze'er Anpin, which is the 6 emotions higher than Shechina, is called the king. What's the life of the king? What's even higher from where the Ze'er Anpin gets its energy? Where does the Ze'er energy gets it? And from its mother, what's the mother? That's Bina. So, and Bina is called, therefore it's called Chaye HaMelech. So that's what the Sifri says. When you make a vow, you're actually making a vow in the life of the king. You're touching upon Bina, because Bina is a source of Makifim. The Alter Rebbe is just using that to prove the idea that the idea of a vow is to draw down and activate an Ur Makif. This is the idea that abstinence brings to holiness. Because when you're abstaining, you're not just abstaining, you're actually elevating it to its holy source. Holiness is higher than abstinence. Holiness is the Ein Sof. You're connecting it to the lights of Toy. That's why the sages say another dafka, that you can't make it holy by comparison, only by comparing it to something that is made holy through the mouth. Just like something that is a korban, a sacrifice, a thing that is donated to the Beis Hamikdash, a korban, like a korban, actually is elevated. Is through the sanctification of a person's mouth. That the person elevates it. Which through this a person draws it down upon it in an encompassing light. And this is what magdish means. Just like kedushin, or makif, which is the drawing down of the lights of the makif. So this is what I mentioned earlier. It's the same like a marriage. Where in a marriage, the man brings down on the bride, on his kala, on his first an encompassing light. Then they later can have a deeper union. Ubia and the marital union, which is an indwelling light. So similar to that, when you're magdish the korban, when you consecrate the animal through the mouth. If you draw upon it an encompassing light, and afterwards, and afterwards, when you offer it and it becomes a korban, that's when you draw down the internal light. And then it elevates the person. You elevate it, and then it elevates the person. And the same is also by a vow. Through the words, in which you hinge it onto something else. You say, this should be like a sacrifice. But after your speech, human speech, through this you draw down the light of makif. And you elevate it. And this is the concept of vows for those who took vows for God's sake, for a holy purpose. People who made vows in an unholy way, that we're not talking about. People who took vows with the right intentions, did it with this intention. Then on this they say, that the darim brings you to a state of abstinence, and the abstinence brings you to holiness. This is a very, very, very noble way of dealing with the world when you're not ready. But here's one thing. Today's days, we know we're supposed to say Bali Neder. Now, if a Neder is so important, why shouldn't we say Neder? Today's days, we're told to say Bali Neder, because the idea is, however, today's days, Achshav Tzarech Loim Bali Neder. Why? So here he doesn't say, but I think in the original Maimer explains, because we're not on such a high level, even to make a Neder. Now, the highest level you have to be in order to elevate through eating. Lower than that is to make a neder. Why? Because I think, it's my own thought, to make a neder, you're also, we said before, the power is through human speech. So a person can be a total human, real human, and then you can eat the animal. You can be semi-human, and at least you still have the power in your speech to be able to create armak. But if you even lost that, and you don't even have a trace of that human, the real quality of human as godly human, you don't have that, then we don't even have the power with our mouth to say something to be able to elevate it. So today's days, even if we're practicing abstinence, it must be beli neder, without a neder. Oh wait, very soon, we're going to be on the highest levels. Actually, I'm just going to conclude with one beautiful thought. Not only when Mashiach will come, will we suddenly so quickly be elevated to our human status, but animals are going to be much higher. It says that from the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Chabad Rebbe says that when Mashiach comes, we're going to be able to do sacrifices. Some people think we won't have sacrifices then. Chas v'shalom, we will have sacrifices. And the sacrifices then will be higher than there has ever been, because we say in davening, there, in the third temple, we will do mitzvahs like you commanded us. So one of the explanations, the Rebbe Marash explains why then we will do. He says, because in order for a korban to be perfect, the human bringing the korban has to be on his highest level, and the animal has to be on his highest level. When Mashiach will come, animals will know God too. As it says, all flesh will see. Even animals will have. Animals won't be predatory anymore. Animals will be in a much higher level. So the human will be a human. The one who's bringing the korban will be the human. He will be really reflecting Shema. The animal will be on the highest level. The animal can be tamim, complete. And then we will offer the korban. So even though we're putting ourselves down now, we're saying we can't even make a vow. That's only for the last seconds or two left. And then, Be'ezras Hashem, very soon, will be way beyond that. Be'ezras Hashem. And we see it now. Thank you for listening.